Good morning, good morning, good morning. How's everyone doing? Happy resurrection morning. Um, Good to see everybody coming on and happy Easter. Um, so today we're going to be in John 11, John chapter 11, verses 17 through 46, and then verse 53. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to talk about the resurrection. It's Easter. Jesus is no longer bound in the grave. He folded the linens and he put everything up. Um, and he walked out. But we're going to talk about a different resurrection today. We're going to talk about the resurrection of Lazarus. And we're going to look at similarities between Lazarus' resurrection and Jesus' resurrection. So if you're on YouTube, I ask y'all please just to kind of sign your name in the chat so I know that y'all are watching. I see everybody coming on Instagram. Good morning. Happy resurrection morning. Once again, we're going to be in John chapter 11, verses 17 through 46, and then verse 53. So around this time, Jesus was going around performing miracles and things like that. And and a lot of times, a lot of people, seeing is believing. We fully believe that if we see it, we're going to believe it. And I know I say that a lot as it is. I say, words say a lot, but you got to show me, right? And, we're more likely to believe in something if we see it. And a lot of times Jesus was walking around and he was doing these miracles. And a lot of people thought of a magician, right? When we see a magician, there's three routes that we tend to go. We see with wonder, like, oh man, that was cool. That was amazing. That was you just go through there. Oh wow, you slide a hand, right? We know there's a deeper meaning behind it, but we don't almost man, you did that wrong. You did this, that, or you could have done it this way. This would have been better. Blah 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 blah. You could have added it up that way, but then you could also just ignore it altogether. And a lot of people did that, even in Jesus' time. That's what's crazy. 2,000 years have passed, and not much has really changed between the way people act then and the way people act now. We look at it, we see it, but we're like, okay, do it again. How many times did Jesus have to perform miracles in front of multiple people? Jesus had to provide bread multiple times, like he fed the thousands, right? Jesus cured the sick. He had the blind, right? But there's only one time that I remember that he's brought somebody back from the dead. And it's actually, if we remember our English class, we're foreshadowing his resurrection. So what I want to do is I want to read, and I want to make it clear that, this isn't a magic trick. There's no magic behind it. All right, this is the power of God. And, the resurrection, it's a miracle, and this miracle demands the response, right? This miracle, back then it was seeing was believing. We can't see the resurrection now. But if you want to see the resurrection, you got to believe in it. All right, so this resurrection we look at today shows us the power and the glory of God. All right, so I'm going to start reading. I'm going to read John 11, verses 17 through 46. I'm going to break it up, and I'm going to kind of explain what's going on. So at this time, Lazarus dies in Bethany. Lazarus had been sick. Somebody had went and told Jesus, hey, Lazarus is sick. Our friend is sick. And Jesus turns around and tells his disciples, hey, Lazarus is asleep. And they're like, oh, well, he'll wake up. He'll wake up. That's fine. He'll wake up. And Jesus is like, no, guys, Lazarus is dead. Right? But Jesus didn't come right away. Jesus finished what he was doing. Jesus continued what he was doing. And when Jesus arrived, verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near, Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away. So many of the Jews had came out to Martha and Mary to comfort them and their brother. So a lot of times when somebody had died, there was these weepers, they called them. These weepers came and they kind of cried with the family. And, it's kind of, I would never imagine today having weepers come to the house just to cry. That's crazy. But that's what they did. It was more of a comforting thing, like the family, let the family know that, yes, they were missed and so on and so forth. So, but as soon as Martha had heard that Jesus was coming, verse 20, as soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And then Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who believes in me, will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, Martha told him. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into this world. So we have Jesus telling you, hey, I have the power. I have the ability to bring him back. You don't believe all these other miracles that I have done. I have shown you. You know that I'm the Messiah. You know that I'm the teacher. I have came to break the chains, to free those who have been in bondage. But there's still this hesitation of what is this life like afterwards? And you got to think, this was a movement that was started. Really, the Christianity church didn't come until after the resurrection, right? So you don't have you don't have Paul in his movement. You don't have the disciples going out and teaching until after Jesus had, been lifted up into, or had gone up into heaven. So we have, and it's very important. So we see that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. He had been in the tomb for 4 days. And that was very important at this time. If he had been in the tomb for 4 days, a lot of people believed that, hold on one second. This is driving me crazy. There we go. A lot of people believed at that time that the spirit left the body after 3 days. A lot of times you hear that when you die, you're still aware of what's going on. Your brain is still functioning. So even at this time, they didn't understand that. But what they did understand is, the body started to decompose at day 3. So when the body started to decompose, that was when they were fully aware that the spirit was gone and the person was truly dead, which is important. Which is I want to pull, and we're going to continue on that verses 28, but I'm going to pull that back up here in a second. So verse 28. This is Jesus shares the sorrow of death. This is the shortest verse in the Bible is in this section right here. Having said this, verse 28, having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, Teacher, the teacher is here and he is calling you. And as soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. So Jesus knew Lazarus was dead. Martha came. Martha pleaded to Jesus. And Jesus was still outside the village. You got to understand that the people of Bethany didn't really like Jesus being there. There was conflict and they had trouble going back, but Lazarus was there. Mary and Martha was there, right? But he's still delaying, right? He's still, this is the proof that, nothing happens on our time. Everything that we have planned is in the path or been planned by the glory of God. And, we can want something right now. Jesus is going to tell us to wait, right? And that goes for anything. So verse 31. Then the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry. So the weepers that were there, Mary got up and ran out the house, and they thought she was going to the tomb to weep at the tomb. But she went and saw Jesus. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her crying, the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved. So Jesus was deeply moved, not only emotionally, but he was moved in his spirit, and he was really troubled. And I like to think that, I like to think that Jesus is, I like to think that, he was troubled because, one, he loved Martha, he loved Mary, he loved all the disciples, and seeing them hurt to a point. But I also want to believe that this was also a trouble because, he had performed all these miracles. He knew what was getting ready to happen, but not a lot of people yet believed in him. So I got a question that popped up. If God's in control, why doesn't he stop this virus? Everything is in God's hands. You got to think a lot of sin, a lot of pain and suffering that we endure comes from sin. That was Wednesday night's lesson. Comes from sin, and that sin's either inherited or something that we chose. So this virus, I fully believe, is an inherited sin from the fall of man, wherever that might be. But God's in control. God will find the cure in God's time. And there's going to be a bigger picture at the end of this tunnel. Kind of like at the end of this story. There is a bigger picture for Christianity and religion. But that was a really good question. And I do believe, once again, that he's going to stop this virus on his time. So, verses 34, "Where have you put him?" Jesus asked. "Lord," they told him, "come and see." And Jesus wept. Verse 36, "So the Jews said, 'See how he loved him?' But some of them said, 'Couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes have kept this man from dying?'" So you have right here, half of the people kind of believed, man, Jesus is awesome, Jesus is power. And then the other half, who had been his followers for a long time, was like, couldn't he have stopped him from dying? But there's a reason. There is a reason why Jesus waited 4 days to get this to start up. He waited 4 days to come to the tomb. And this is one of the 7th signs. Hello, Pierce. How are you doing? This is the 7th sign, the raising Lazarus from the dead. So, verse 38. "Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. And it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it." So we got similarities here. And this is one of the similarities I'm going to point out. You have the stone in Jesus' tomb. You have the stone in front of Lazarus' tomb. All right? And the stone was lying against it. "Remove the stone," Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, "Lord, there had already been a stench because he has been dead 4 days." This is going back to the, he had been dead. The body he had left, the spirit had left him. So therefore the body had started decomposing. So there's this stench around this cave or this tomb. So around day 3, like I said, and we got day 3, the spirit leaves. Day 3, the spirit leaves. But on the third day, we have this resurrection, right? On the day 4 and this day 3. And then Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that you believed, that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Once again, we have another similarity. They moved the stone. Jesus didn't have anyone to remove the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. They may believe that you sent me." In verse 43, after Jesus had said this, he shouted. Once again, we have another one. Shouted, and no one shouted at Jesus. He shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, bound bound hand and foot with linen stripes, and with his face wrapped in cloth. Another similarity. Lazarus was bound hand and foot, and he was wrapped in his face. And his face wrapped in cloth. And Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him go. So verses 45 and 44, we'll read that one here in a second. So now I've gone through these similarities, right? So why did Jesus wait 4 days? Because, and we talked about the magician at the beginning, he didn't want people to think this was a magic trick. He wanted everybody to fully believe that, Lazarus was dead. Lazarus has not been there for days, right? His spirit had already gone up. So he didn't want this to be confused. He wanted the people to understand that he is the only way to heaven. God sent him to complete the bridge to God. Jesus is the only way we get to heaven. He wanted everyone at this time to understand this. So he waited 3 days to show that this wasn't a magic trick. He waited the 4 days. Okay. And Lazarus' resurrection here is also foreshadowing the Christ on resurrection. All right. And we went through, Jesus had to shout at Lazarus. People had to remove the stone. Lazarus had to be untied. And if we look back to Jesus on that third day rose. Jesus not only rose, but he folded everything that had him bound up. He folded it at the foot of his bed. All right, Jesus saw, Lazarus saw in human form. Yes, Lazarus had to die again eventually. But Jesus saw with his wounds in his hands and his feet and the crown on his head. Jesus even materialized. He went through a wall. There was a locked door. The people, his disciples, were scared. And Jesus came in. Not only did he send them out, but he ate with them. So we have to fully believe that this wasn't a ghost. Jesus, his wounds were touched by his disciples. He was able to eat with them. I don't know any ghosts, but you have ghosts that can't eat, I would imagine, right? So, so what I'm trying to say is, there was an article I read when I was studying this verse, right? There was an article I read that about he had went in and tried to find some undercover. He went undercover, had some people go in and just search for stuff, and they got caught, right? If you ever watched the movie Forrest Gump, when he's on the phone in the hotel room, and there's people with flashlights across that's the Watergate scandal, right? So, so Chuck Colson wrote this article, and he goes, how do I know that the resurrection story in Christianity is real, right? How do I know this? Well, the Watergate, they investigated 12 guys. Similarities, right? 12 disciples. Watergate investigated 12 people. And not only did they investigate 12 people, they investigated 12 of the most powerful people that were deeply involved in this. Very strong government officials. And they did it for 3 weeks. And for 3 weeks, these people were able to tell the truth, or tell a lie. When I want you to think of, and parents, cover your ears if you're watching, right? Kids, students, how long have you been able to tell a lie? Right? Probably not very long. The truth always comes out. You're going to tell this lie, and it could last for a year. It could last for so on, right? But eventually, you're either A, going to be convicted of that lie, or B, the parents or whoever you're lying to is going to find out. You're going to show your true colors. All right, so how do you know that Christianity, the apostles, 12 apostles, 12 disciples, were beaten, were tortured, were stoned, and were thrown in prisons, right? The 12 people in the Watergate scandal were just talked to. They were investigated, right? There was no beating, torturing, right? The 12 apostles were all tortured, stoned, made fun of. The list goes on until they died about 40 years later. So for 40 years, you're telling me that they were able to tell this lie. Chuck Colson was like, I don't believe it. I believe that, people who can continue to fight, and you got to think, after Christ was risen on that third day, that's when this movement of Christianity started. You have Paul, you have Timothy, you have the apostles. They went out and they started making churches. But, Chuck Colson's like, the apostles, the 12 apostles who walked with Jesus for 12 years, or for years, were able to tell this for 4 years. And what I'm trying to say is, Camden, is this isn't a lie, right? Anyone who can carry a lie on for 4 years and no one know the truth is, crazy. But people saw that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. The officials, and there's historical documents. There's historical documents that show that, there was this man named Jesus that had died. They had hung him on the cross, right? There's proof of this. And there's proof that, on the third day, the tomb that he was at was empty. So this isn't, this book has actually become a very good history book, a very good historical document. But, on that last day, when we've been dead and we've been in the tomb for, or, maybe we're alive. We don't know when Jesus is coming back, but Jesus is going to shout. And he's going to say, as a streak of lightning through the sky, Jesus is going to shout. And are we ready to go with him? All right, so I'm going to finish these verses, verse 45, 46, and then 53. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Even after a resurrection, some people did not believe. And then from that day forward, verse 53, so from that day on, they plotted to kill Jesus. I asked y'all this morning, Friday would have been the start of they had buried Jesus in the tomb, and then today is the resurrection. They went to visit the tomb, and Jesus is not there. We're going to be like Lazarus. Jesus is going to call our name, and we're going to be bound. We're going to have our hands untied, and that's what Jesus came to do. Jesus came to break the chains that held us here on earth, just so we can live with him forever. And if you believe that Jesus came to die for your sins, Jesus came for you, and Jesus raised 3 days later, then do you believe that when he calls your name, you're going to go with him? So, that's all I have. I have one more question. But he wants to give us free will, but he was mad when Adam and Eve sinned. Hold on one second. Let me read it. Another question, sorry. Could have made everyone. So let me ask you this. Would you want to force someone to like you, or would you want to, and this one's not about resurrection, this is about Wednesday's message. Would you want someone to like you, or would you want to force someone to like you? Same question. God doesn't want to force you to like him. Jesus doesn't want to make you like him. Jesus wants you to have that ability. He wants you to make the decision. That's that free will that we're talking about. So, but yes, he was probably upset, but I wouldn't say mad, but we couldn't walk with him. So I ask y'all today, I pray that y'all are saved. Most of the people I know, I've talked to y'all. There's some that might be watching today that aren't saved. I pray that you take this story that, for 40 years, the disciples were tortured. They were stoned. They were made fun of. They were thrown in prison, yet they still told the truth for 40 years. Most people can't tell a lie for a few days. So how do you know this wasn't a lie? Because they did it for 40 years. So I pray that if y'all don't know, y'all take a step back. Y'all read the resurrection story. You watch Pastor Martin's message today, and I pray that you're moved. I pray that God's speaking to you, and I pray that if He is speaking to you, if He's knocking on that door, don't keep it locked. Jesus is calling your name right now. He wants you to be with Him, and I pray that you take that calling, and you become a follower of Him. All right. So let us pray, and I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Lord, I thank you for all the many blessings you pour upon us, Lord. I thank you for allowing us to, have opportunities and ways to grow in knowledge of you, Lord. I pray that when we die and you call our name, that we know that we're coming to you. I know that Jesus came, He died on the cross, and He was raised on that third day. And I fully believe that, Jesus is the one way that we can come to you. He is the resurrection, and He is the light. Lord, I love you. I care about you. I pray that you continue to be a hedge of protection around our friends, our family. I pray that you keep us safe and just lead us and guide us as we do your will, Lord. And I pray that for my students that are watching and the ones that are going to watch this, that you give them, if they're knocking on that door, that they don't just keep it shut. They open that door and they let you in. I pray that as they continue to grow in knowledge of you, that you continue to bless their lives. Lord, I love you. I thank you. In your name I pray. Amen. Y'all have a great day.